Avis, cette capsule a été produite simultanément en français et en anglais. Notice, this episode was produced simultaneously in English and French. Vous écoutez présentement la version anglaise. You are currently watching the English version.
Hello and welcome to STereotypic STeist. I'm your host, Guy, from the other day. Today we're going to discuss a game that was requested by a patron via Patreon, which game is one of the good platformer games released on the ST. Developed by the British company Bitmap Brothers and published by Renegade in 1991, this game is Gods. Before digging into the game, I'd like to thank my patrons via Patreon. If you enjoy what I do, consider supporting me. Not only do my patrons have priority regarding the choice of games for future episodes, but they also get sneak previews throughout the development of any project. Now, let's talk about Gods.
As I said earlier, Gods is a platform game with puzzle elements. It's spectacular for the ST in its original version, as well as for the STE, for which we possibly added or adapted elements that could take advantage of the capabilities of the STE at the time when some were trying to confront it with its main rival, namely the Commodore Amiga. The reason for my hesitation to comment on the question is that I don't have an Atari STE, and that I had to test Gods using emulation in STE mode precisely, and that I didn't see any notable difference, and this in full knowledge of the facts. I may have missed something, and I invite you to write me if this is the case. I also won't take too long to explain what platform games are all about. I'd just like to remind you that those involving horizontal scrolling sometimes posed a problem for the ST, which, in its original version, had no blitter chip. The screen memory works in 32-bit clusters, and to achieve smooth scrolling 2 or 4 pixels at a time, some visuals had to be prepared or pre-shifted in advance.
I'll address this topic a little later in this episode.
The synopsis of Gods boils down to this somewhat. It takes place in a citadel erected by gods, which citadel was robbed by, let's say, 4 guardians. They, that is to say the gods, have therefore issued a challenge, namely that a hero annihilates these 4 guardians, in exchange for which he will obtain immortality. The citadel per se is divided into 4 levels, namely the city, the temple, the labyrinth, and the underworld. Each of these levels is subdivided in turn into subsections, which constitute stages, which are checkpoints and allow the next section to be loaded into memory. As with most platform games, the universe is made up of tiles. The tiles' visuals are written in a reference memory, and the level's layouts are in fact only a packet of bytes, which refer to these tiles. The level sizes remain rather considerable. There's an entry point, an exit point, as well as an ideal path to follow, with some alternate routes. Usually the most obvious path is riddled with traps, such as enemies popping out of nowhere. It's very common, and it causes the protagonist to quickly lose energy. The fact remains that sometimes the game becomes a W-dig as well as a W-did, where do I go and a what do I do?
Which brings me to talk about the interface and the controls. The game being a PUAP, there is nothing very enigmatic, but I'll explain them anyways.
The play area dominates the screen. To the top left are the remaining lives. At the bottom left is the energy level indicator. At the bottom right is the score. At the bottom dead center, finally, we find the inventory when summoned. When you reach the end of a level and are confronted by a boss, his energy level appears at the bottom right of the screen. Otherwise, the enemies encountered along the way only require a few blows to be defeated.
There are very few varieties of monsters in the game, but each one has a particular purpose and their appearance can change from level to level.
The killer, for instance, is only intended to make you lose energy. Killers hunt the protagonist for this purpose. The flyer, on the other hand, is able to fly and avoid some of your projectiles, making it or them harder to kill. Finally, the thief intends to steal items from your inventory, otherwise it makes you lose energy. This monster is sometimes useful to obtain an object out of reach.
For this, you had to know, that is to say, you had to read the manual. The rest is self-explanatory.
The protagonist is controlled using the joystick. Left and right are used to walk in the desired direction. Up allows you to climb a ladder or position yourself to activate a lever or button, along with the joystick button. Down is used to bend down or go down a ladder, or to pick up or leave an object in or from your inventory, also with the joystick button. Diagonals upwards, on the other hand, are used to jump in the desired direction, whether from the ground or from a ladder, and the same applies to diagonals downwards. The fire button, finally, is used to fire projectiles.
If you have an enhanced controller, as I explained in a previous episode, it'll be easier for you to play, otherwise you'll have to get used to the diagonals.
Throughout the quest, there will be items to collect, the most common being keys and gems. Depending on the color and shape of the key, it changes the utility. An iron key, for example, is used to open a door or a hatch, depending on its shape. A bronze key opens a room or a treasure room, all depending. Gold ones are used for teleportation, potentially towards the end of the level, depending on the shape.
This is an easy guess if you play enough.
Besides the keys, there is money or gold to collect. Like in Xenon 2, you can use the gold to, let's say, buy items from a store you have access to halfway through as well as at the end of each level. You can buy weapons, items, or potions. As for the weapons, if you buy one, it's exchanged for the one you own for half its value, with the exception of the bomb, which can be used at the same time as the dagger or the shuriken. Items or potions, on the other hand, remain in the inventory until you use them, i.e. until you remove them from your inventory. This is particularly the case regarding both standard or starburst shields. The standard shield halves the enemy damage, and you get to keep it for the entire level. The starburst is an invulnerability shield, but it lasts only 15 seconds.
Besides the maze aspect of the game, there are puzzles, traps, and hidden rooms.
In all cases, either it's meant to help you progress, or to reward you, or it's meant to kill you. An example of this resides in levers. Normally, they activate a door or they open a trapdoor, but they can also spawn one or more enemies. Sometimes the levers also work in correlation, which means you have to activate some of them and deactivate others to reveal a hidden room, for example, or reveal a hidden treasure.
At the end of each segment, the number of residual lives and collected jewels and treasures grant you a bonus. It's well thought out overall, and even if you don't have the instruction manual, you can possibly figure out, for instance, what does what and where to go as you play.
From a programming perspective, it is also a tour de force. In addition to scrolling in all directions, which I will address in a bit, more than 16 colors are displayed simultaneously on the screen, 37 colors in the original ST mode, and apparently 57 in STE mode. The trick in the original ST mode is to redefine the color palette for some scanlines during the vertical blank. For the parallax effect, say, i.e. the sky, there is only one background color, which is not the color 0, which nevertheless changes as it does in Nebulous, for which I did an episode recently. Regarding the tiles, we do the same. There is a part of the palette that doesn't change, namely the colors used for the protagonist and the enemies, the skin color that is, because they can be anywhere on the screen. It's the other residual colors that are adjusted.
It's a bit of a programming headache because even though we can write interrupt requests into registers, the sprites are constantly moving around.
Regardless, for static images, the technique has been used over and over again, resulting in spectacular visuals on the ST. The title screen of one of the versions of Ooze makes use of it. To prevent any flickering of the image from being visible when redefining the palette, we use wide black borders at the edges. When the electron beam begins to draw the image, the palette is well anchored. In Gods, in its ST version, flickering is not noticeable, with a few exceptions. We notice it on occasion at the bottom of the screen, in the green zone, for which it's necessary to quickly redefine half of the color palette. For the sky's gradient, it doesn't show because there is only one color to change. Sound-wise, the ST version uses the tone channels so as not to monopolize the processor already busy with the moving sprites as well as the settings. This is the usual compromise, and it's a distinction in regards to the Amiga version because from a visual standpoint, the two versions compete quite well with one another, even if the animation on the Amiga seemed a notch better. The only exception is the intro music, which is digitized for both the ST and the Amiga. Another competitor is the PC version running DOS in 256 color VGA. There are no gradients regarding the sky, but for the rest of the visuals there really was an effort, although the sound effects are somewhat different and not quite on par with those on the Amiga. We could have created a sky for the background with a gradient and superimposed the elements of the settings to it, but if we were to use 200 different tones or hues for a gradient sky, there would only be 56 colors left for the rest.
It's a gimmick that doesn't add much to the game.
Moreover, while writing the script for this episode, I took a look at the Genesis/Megadrive version, which illustrates real parallax effects, but nothing very conclusive overall, especially since the soundtrack quickly turned out to be somewhat annoying. As I was evaluating the 16-bit versions, I also tested the SNES adaptation, which I enjoyed more, although I can't say exactly why. The parallax effect is also included, but doesn't add anything more to the game, except to give the impression that there's a hidden universe in or behind the background. The advantage in both cases, Genesis and SNES, is that there's a dedicated jump button.
As I said, the parallax effect is a gimmick. It makes the game visually appealing, but without blittering, it slows down the code execution.
Finally, getting back to the gameplay, when you die, you start over at the most recent checkpoint. That said, if the game ends permanently, you receive a password that you can use later on to resume the game at the start of the level in which you died the previous time. Passwords consist of 3 letters, with the exception of invincibility, which is acquired by entering sorcery. The others are well documented and can easily be found on the net.
As always, I ask the question, could we have done better for the original ST version?
It's debatable. I think that because of the absence of a blitter chip, we achieved an acceptable frame rate considering the scrolling which is carried out in all directions, as well as animations, not to mention the extended colors, meaning that their number exceed the usual 16 for a game on the ST. Moreover, regarding the frame rate, as in Xenon 2, we note that there is little slowdown when there are many simultaneous elements on the screen. Regarding horizontal scrolling, it's definitely a tour de force. I remind you that in some side-scrolling games, we usually find black borders at the edges of the screen, borders each measuring 16 pixels wide. This is because we need them to hide the scrolling that is carried out in the background. Without any blitter chip nor any borders, we are faced with 3 choices. Either we scroll 32 bits at a time, either we jump from one segment to another, as in Great Gianna Sisters, either we work in the background to move the setting 2 or 4 pixels at a time, which usually takes time. And just for the record, in Gods, the horizontal scrolling is done in steps of 4 pixels. However, this scrolling is not continuous or ongoing. We scroll the setting only when necessary, that is to say when the protagonist goes beyond a certain X and or Y coordinate on the screen, which saves CPU cycles.
This is one difference between hardware scrolling and software scrolling. For hardware scrolling, scrolling registers are used to move items around on the screen. Software scrolling still involves copying and pasting on-screen elements, but manually in a routine within the program.
The same logic applies to sprites. For hardware sprites, it's the computer that takes care of erasing the previous frame by bringing the background to the foreground before superimposing the sprite's new frame. With software sprites, the same has to be done manually within the program in a routine, and it takes more CPU cycles to do it, which slows down the execution of the code, which can make the game somewhat choppy.
I remind you that each instruction requires at least 4 CPU cycles, plus operands, if any.
Otherwise, some digitized sound effects would have been welcome, even if it meant a possible slowdown regarding the latter, i.e. the frame rate. What's missing in my opinion is some form of soundtrack. In Turrican, for example, there is one, and on the ST it's played using the tone channels. It surely doesn't compete with the one on the Amiga, but I still liked it enough to go listen to it in its entirety in a remastered version.
Otherwise, I have no complaints about the game. It's of its time, sure, but it's very well executed, especially considering the capabilities of the original ST.
It's somewhat different from other Bitmap Brothers games that preceded Gods, and also different from games that followed, with the possible exception of Magic Pockets, which was released in 1991, the same year as Gods, which demonstrates once again that the developers knew very well the inner workings of the computer. It's in the same spirit, in my opinion, as Lost Vikings, published in 1993, with scrolling and puzzles to solve, with the difference that Lost Vikings features 3 characters, each with a particular skill.
That said, despite all the qualities I could find for Gods, in terms of replayability, it's debatable.
It's not that I got tired of the genre, but I played God so much for the purposes of this episode that I don't want to play it again for a long time, if not forever. Plus, there are so many platform and puzzle games that I've never played that I want to discover more of them. Finally, what I did not say in my previous episode is that my game collection has so many titles that there are some among the number that I've never ever played.
This was today's episode. As usual, like, subscribe, share, support, and don't hesitate to let me know in the comments of your impressions regarding the game Gods. What do you think? Which version do you prefer? Also, if there are any games you'd like me to talk about, let me know. I'll get to them one day. I'm Guy from the other day. See you soon.